She sprinted onto a national stage as a high school student because she dared to speak the truth. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Selina Soule is fast on her feet. Selina won conference titles, state titles, and qualified for national titles in track and field in 2017 and 18. But during Selina's 4 years in high school, she watched two males steal 15 women's state championship titles in track and field that were previously held by 9 women, all because of policy that allows male athletes to compete on girls' and women's sports teams. Selina joins us on this episode of Freedom Alive to share her story and why she's speaking out against this madness. I'm blessed to again be joined by our co-host, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, when males are allowed to infiltrate female sports and steal women's championships and records, it really is madness. In fact, most Americans believe that athletes should compete with their biological sex. People just aren't falling for the idea that men and women can compete on the same team.
Well, it's obvious, and it is madness, of course, as you said, that men or boys could compete in girls' or women's sports. I mean, women and girls have fought for years to be able to have the equal opportunity to be able to compete in sports. And as Selina's story shows, she was very competitive, and in fact, this was part of her life growing up, sports, and she was very good at her sports. And other girls that were around her in Connecticut were very good at their sports, and they had dreams and aspirations. And all of that was stolen by this ridiculous policy that allows a man or a boy to say, well, I identify as the opposite sex, and then go into the sports and compete against women. It makes the competition unfair.
Mm-hmm. It really is remarkable. We cannot wait to bring this story to you, but our Freedom Alert is next.
God's Word is coming to this state's classrooms. Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Walters recently announced the purchase of more than 500 Bibles for use in advanced placement government classrooms in the state. This purchase is the first in the nation Bible purchase explicitly for use in schools as an academic and literary resource. Walters said, "By acting now, Oklahoma is leading the country on a path toward greater focus on academic excellence by providing critical, historical, cultural, and literary context for our students." Along with the Bible, every classroom in Oklahoma will also receive the Pledge of Allegiance, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the U.S. Constitution for every classroom in Oklahoma. Students should learn true history from God's Word and the founders. Hopefully, other states will take note and do the same.
Up next, Matt's interview with Selina Soule.
I'm pleased to be joined by a very special guest, Selina Soule, and she is a sprinter and a long jumper. And in high school, she has an amazing record: 10-time All-Conference, 5-time All-State, 3-time All-New England, 4-time national champion qualifier. One of the first women sports advocates because of what happened to you when you were in high school in Connecticut. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Selina.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go back to how you got into sports, and we want to take up to what happened when you were at the top of your game in long jump, as well as particularly in sprinting, and then you had these males that wanted to identify themselves as females enter into your sports. I want to get to that in a minute, but how did you get into sports?
Sports have always been a big part of my life. I was a bundle of energy as a child, so my parents threw me into all kinds of different activities to get that energy out. My parents were very active growing up, so when I was little, I did figure skating, I did skiing, swimming, gymnastics, cheerleading. I also did musical theater on top of that, so I was just a very active child, but track and field was very natural for me to get into because both my parents had done it growing up. My mom did track and field in her home country of Romania from 6 years old up until high school. And my dad was a mid-distance and a high jumper when he was in high school.
Wow, so athletics and being active is in your DNA of the family.
Very much so.
So now, how young were you when you started competing?
I started competing in track and field when I was 8 years old, but I started running when I was 5. My town put on these fun runs through the Parks and Rec every summer, and it was a mile-long run at the high school. And I remember that our track, the course started in the front of the school. We went around to the back, ran around this field a couple of times, and then came to the finish line. And I remember even at 5 years old, after that first time going around that field, I wanted to be done. I didn't want to do the other 2 laps. So I discovered from a very early age that distance running was not for me. So when I was 8 years old, my gym teacher told us of this track meet that was going to be put on at the high school called the Hershey Track and Field Games. So I decided to sign up. My mom took me to the track. We worked on the short sprint events, and at that point they were doing the standing long jump, the broad jump for the small kids. They weren't doing the full normal long jump from the running start. And from the time that the gun went off during my very first meet, I absolutely fell in love with the sport and continued to do it for as long as I could. A few years later, I found out about the Nutmeg State Games put on by the State Games of America, and that's an all-ages meet, so I was able to compete alongside my mother for many years, and in the last year, my dad actually competed alongside us.
So you're competing with your mom and dad?
Correct. Correct.
So it's for anybody?
It's for anybody. So anybody, I believe it starts from 4 or 5 years old, and they were always at the meet. Several men competing that were well up into their 80s and 90s that you would see them every single year in a million years. Oh, of course I could. When I was little, it was a little closer, but by the time that I started to get up into middle school,
she had no competition.
It was starting to outperform her, exactly.
Yeah. Well, so then you're going through school at age 8, starting in this competition. Now you finally get to high school, and what sports did you choose? Obviously, sprinting is one, and long jump is another. But why did you choose that? That's something that just you've developed over time since 8 years old?
Exactly. Those were the events that I found that I competed best in, and those were the ones that I wanted to stick with. So when I got into high school, it was all about improving on my times. I didn't have to worry about figuring out the form or the technique for any of the events. And I couldn't wait to get to high school and be a part of an organized team because it was just my parents and I doing it for so long, and I couldn't share my love of track and field with kids my age. But that all was kind of overshadowed by the fact that I had to compete against not 1, but 2 biological males.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a minute. But you were a 10-time all-conference champion.
Correct.
Is that 10 consecutive? Is that 10 years of competition?
No, that is per event. So the way that
event. Okay,
the way
the
that
various
they give
events
out
that you would sprint in.
Correct. The way that they give out the titles.
That's incredible. So you were a conference champion in what areas of sprinting?
Yeah, I was conference champion. All my titles have come in the 100, 200, long jump, and then indoors the 55 and the 4x200 meter relay. That's
amazing. 10 times, and then 5 times all-state. 3 times all New England, and 4 times a national qualifier. Tell us what happened as you're starting to go through all of this, and now you're coming towards the end of your college or your high school career. Obviously, you love sports. That's a great opportunity for you to showcase yourself. Colleges to look at you for scholarships and so forth. And what happens with your competition? You say that 2 guys started to come into your sports.
So they actually started to compete my freshman year of high school. So the first biological male had always competed as a girl. I didn't compete.
So this person actually was in the girls' competition before.
Correct.
And then shifted and said, now I want to identify had always wanted to do this, I guess, in the girls' competition.
Yes. So one, I guess, decided before high school that, they felt like a woman. So my freshman year, I didn't compete against this athlete in the indoor season, but in the outdoor season, I did compete against this individual. And going into the meet, I had no idea that there would be a man running alongside me. It was only after I had completed my heat in the 200-meter dash and I had made it back up to my team sections in the stands that I was able to see this athlete run and dominate the heat. And I just thought, wow, this is some really good girl. She's really fast. And one of my teammates' parents came up to me and said, hey, by the way, that is actually a guy. That's not a woman.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, that there was a man competing in a women's category. It just didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't compete against that athlete much the following year in the indoor season. But then in the outdoor season, my sophomore year, at that very same meet, a year later, a second biological male came and competed. And we, again, had no idea. I knew that the first biological male was going to be there. So we are getting into our blocks for the 100-meter dash. And I know that at best I'm going to come in second because I can't outrun this male. And once the gun went off, I expected him to take off. But instead, somebody else outran him. And then afterwards, I found out that that was a second biological male.
So you're competing at the same time with two biological males.
Correct. One had competed as a male for the last 3 seasons, and in the few-week break between the indoor and outdoor seasons, transitioned and started to compete for the girls' team. And between the two of them, they won over 15 women's state championships and broke over 17 state and meet records.
Wow. And they were previously obviously held by women.
Correct.
So in that particular competition, where you should have come in first, you came in what, second or third?
The best I could finish when I competed against them was at third. I don't remember exactly where I finished in that specific meet.
But otherwise, you would have been the winner of those competitions because you were at the top of your game, and these men came in and stole what you have worked for so long.
Correct. Instead of competing for that first place medal, we were competing for third and beyond.
Wow. And how does that affect colleges and scholarships and things like that?
There's no real way of telling how it could affect college recruitment because most coaches, they just go to the results pages for the meets and they see who comes first and second, maybe third.
So they're just going to see you as number 3.
Exactly.
But they're not going to know that you competed against 2 males.
Exactly. They'll just see the 2 really fast times from the males and want to recruit them over us actual girls because there's no way of telling just from the results that the athletes are males.
So you went to high school in Connecticut. In Connecticut, or this particular school, I guess the Connecticut Athletic Association has a policy that allows this to occur. How did you find out about that, and what did you do about it?
So once I had to compete against the first biological male, we looked into the policy and determined that all you needed to do to change your gender and compete on whatever team that you're choosing was going to your main office at school, signing off on a piece of paper, changing your gender, and that's it. No parental approval, no medicalization, no nothing. Just signing your name off on this paper. So the first year we didn't do much because I only had competed against that athlete once. But by the time that the second biological male came around, my parents and I decided to try to talk to our school administrators, our state legislators. We tried to talk to the CAC, the sports governing body. Everyone just kind of shifted the blame around, and we were not getting a clear answer either way. So we decided to start a petition. So we went around the old school way with a piece of paper, on a clipboard and a pencil, asking people for signatures at the meets. And we ended up garnering a lot of local media attention from this because it was such a highly controversial topic. So at just 15 years old, I started doing local television interviews and interviewing for the newspapers and everything.
So what did the rest of the girls feel like? I mean, in this case, they're not just competing out on the running track and the high jump or whatever, but I imagine they're also in your locker rooms and shower rooms.
So for us, I never had to deal with them in the locker rooms. When we go to these big track meets, you can have tens of teams from across the state. So there's not a locker room that's able to equip that many people, so that's not
So
a
you could go to any
issue.
locker room you wanted to. There's a lot of people.
Yeah, there were no locker rooms.
But otherwise, they would be in the presence, if they're in the girls' sports, they would be in the presence of other girls, wherever they are, and amongst all these other people from other schools.
They would be in the locker rooms of their teammates at their high schools, but for the big meets, we didn't use locker rooms. I did see them in line for the bathroom many times at these meets because the bathrooms were open to anybody and everybody. My mother ran into them several times in the bathroom, and in some ways it's threatening having a man in a space like that because you can't be in a more vulnerable place than a locker room or a bathroom. And I have friends that have had to get fully naked in front of these male athletes, and I just can't imagine what it was like for them to go through that. It was bad enough sharing a bathroom with them, in our own little stalls, let alone having that extreme.
I know we had a friend of ours who was sexually assaulted, not in a sports situation, but sexually assaulted, and went to a fitness place. And in the fitness place, they allowed men to go into the women's restroom. That's very, very intimidating for a woman who has been a victim of sexual assault to now find herself alone in a bathroom by herself with nothing else there except for a male in the same private facility. You know, in your case here, you became vocal. What about the other girls? How did they feel about what was going on? What was the tenor of the parents and the girls and the others that saw these men competing against women?
None of my teammates thought it was fair. Even my male teammates didn't think that it was right, but no one was willing to speak out. Everyone was afraid of just potential retaliation from their coaches, from school administrators, from the media. They didn't want it to possibly jeopardize college recruitment. So everyone was just fearful of doing anything. But once I lost out on qualifying for the New England Championships after placing in 8th place in the 55-meter dash at the 2019 Indoor State Open, I said enough is enough. If the adults in the room don't want to protect us, then I'm going to have to stand up and ask for fairness to be restored to my sport. So at 16 years old, I started doing national television interviews.
Well, good for you. And your voice certainly is a welcome voice that needs to be heard so that people can change this real madness that's taken place. I mean, for women and girls, if you go back to the struggle of just having equal opportunity to be able to compete and have their own teams, decades and decades of fighting for that opportunity. And now the crazy thing is that a man who may not be able to compete in the men's competition just switches over to the women's competition and steals what you have rightfully worked for. Give us a little bit of highlights of some of your career. I know it's been a huge career. You have been a stellar in all these different areas because that kind of sets the tone for not only your desire, what sports has done for you, but how you achieved, and then how, as you're coming towards the end of your high school career, these men come in and they just steal the opportunity from you. So give us a little overview. We talked about some of your conference championships, but from a personal standpoint, what are some of the highlights that you experienced as an athlete?
I mean, for me, I'm a very competitive person, so in everything I do, I want to be the absolute best, and if absolute best is not, I can't achieve that, then it's not good enough, then I have to do something to get to that point. So that's how I go into everything that I do, not only sports. So for me, if I wasn't running a personal best or close to a personal best in a meet, I was not happy with myself, and I knew that I had to go and train harder so I can improve the next week. And I walked away from high school with many titles. I also broke 5 school records while I was there, several of which I had broken once, and I kept breaking my own school record. And for me, it was a great time. Despite having to compete against the male athletes, I truly enjoyed competing in high school because we were there every Saturday for 13 hours. So I would only be competing for a small portion of that time. So for me, aside when I was done with competing, it was social hour for me. I would get to talk with my friends from other schools that I wouldn't get to see except for these meets because they could live 45 minutes, an hour away. So you would get time to hang out and to bond and to laugh and to joke. So it became something that I looked forward to every single week, was not only the competing aspect, but getting together with my friends and just laughing and having fun with them.
Now, one of your records was in the long jump, and I believe you weren't competing against men in the long jump,
Correct.
Just girls in the long jump. What was your longest jump?
My longest jump was 18.2 1/4.
18.2 1/4, and that's a record there for your high school?
Correct. I ended up breaking a 42-year-old school record with that jump. It was the longest standing school record at the time.
Amazing. And then in your sprinting, you did 100, 200, and 300 meters. What was your times in some of those?
I did the 100 and 200. Indoors, I did the 55 and the 4x200 meter dash. So my school record breaking time in the 100 meters was 12:46. In the 55, my record breaking time was 7:36. In the 200, I ended up running it with a pulled quad. I ran 26:3, and in the 4x200 meter relay, our school record, New England winning time and national qualifying time was in the 1:43s.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on your achievements.
Thank you.
And also just having a voice to speak up for other girls and women. Your voice is so needed, and just appreciate you doing that. In competing against these men, were there obvious signs that these individuals were men? Was it obvious to the competitors and to the people in the stands?
It was obvious. I remember that very first meet my freshman year when I had to compete against the first athlete. I was getting ready for the 200-meter dash. We were in the bullpen getting our spikes on, and there was this girl who had her back turned to me. She had this really long braided hair, but her arms and her legs looked more defined than the average woman. So I thought that that was a little unusual, but at that point I was trying to get ready for my event. I wasn't trying to focus too much on little details like that. And then afterwards I found out that that athlete was a biological male, and it suddenly made sense why the musculature was so defined. But if you looked at them, I mean, they were taller than us. You know, their muscles were much bigger, much stronger. They were developed differently. You know, aside from some other obvious details, but you could just clearly tell that they were not women.
Now, you've testified in a number of places. Tell us about some of the reception that you had. And I have a hard time, I think most people that just have common sense have a hard time thinking that it's normal or that it's okay for a man to compete in a women's sports. It just is a no-brainer to me. What's some of the reception that you would have when you testified, and where did you testify?
So I've never had a negative interaction in person. Luckily, I've only gotten messages of love and support from people that I've met in person. I've testified in many of the Save Women's Sports bill passings across the country. I have spoken at a lot of the press conferences too. So when the House of Representatives passed the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act a couple of years ago, they invited me to speak at the press conference there. I was able to stand alongside the members, watch them vote.
When we're talking about this, it's one thing to talk about these boys that come in and compete in your sport, but this is something that's near and dear to you. As an athlete, you've trained for your life to do this. You've come through the ranks. You've got all these awards and you've got the medals. And when you're there on that starting line, or when you cross the finish line and you realize that two guys just crossed the finish line ahead of you, and otherwise you would have been the number one, how does that make you feel as a person, and particularly as an athlete?
It's very devastating going through that, because none of us elite female athletes give up hanging out with friends, give up activities on the weekends, anything. We train so hard. When we want to win, we don't want to place fifth and beyond. We're not killing ourselves in practice for that. We want that gold medal. We want to be on the top of the podium. So to go into every single meet almost every week, knowing that there's nothing I can do to win. At best, I will finish second or third, depending on if both athletes are there. It's just one of them. It's devastating and it's heartbreaking. And I know some girls that I competed against ended up changing their events to events that were not their strong suit, just so they wouldn't have to deal with competing against the two males.
Yeah, it's one thing to be in a competition where you should be number one, and you come in number two or number three, depending on how many men are in the competition. But then to know that the next week and the next week you're going to be in the same competitions with these men, and it's almost a disincentive, and it just takes the air out of your balloon, so to speak. I mean, it's very traumatic. I can't even imagine. I wasn't a track athlete, but I was a high school football athlete, and I know what you do as a high school or any athlete. You really put your heart and soul into it. You give up many, many hours to be good at your sport, and then when that is stolen from you by somebody who shouldn't be there, I can't imagine the trauma that it is. What would you like to share with our viewers in terms of what they should know, what they can do, how can they get involved, how can they be a voice?
I think everyone needs to speak up on this issue. It doesn't matter if you haven't had to go through it. You can still have an opinion, and you can still think that it's not fair for women to compete against men, and it's not just girls, it's boys too that can speak up. So I would encourage anybody to speak up, to go to the media if that seems too scary. Talk to your school administrators, your coaches, state legislators, anybody that's willing to sit down and have a meeting with you, because the only way that we will make change is with having many, many voices behind us. If it's just a couple voices, they're not going to care. But if we have thousands and thousands of people behind us, then we might actually finally see some change.
Well, I appreciate you speaking up. What is it that you see in the future? What do you see going forward with this particular issue?
I would like to see women finally getting a fair chance in competition and not having to compete against male athletes, because it's more demoralizing having to compete against these athletes and knowing that there is nothing possibly that you can do to beat them, that even if you compete at your absolute best, if you break records, that there's nothing you can do to get that gold medal.
Well, Selina, I know athleticism is more than just competing. It actually is very good in your character building and competition and camaraderie, and keeps you focused. And certainly it has done a great service for you. And thank you for giving back and being a voice for women and being a voice for all of us, frankly, to be able to bring some sanity to this insane situation where men and boys are competing in sports. And in fact, you know, you might have a male competing in a sprint, but you could have a male in the boxing ring. You could have a male in the wrestling. You could have a male in all these different sports that are contact sports, where women actually have gotten brutally beaten up by men coming into the women's sports. Our guest is Selina Soule. She is an athlete, and she is a strong voice for women and just common sense. So this program is aired all over the world. Many of you live in states that have already passed laws that are protecting women, but many of you don't. And so I encourage you to be a voice for common sense and be a voice for women, be a voice for our athletes, and be a voice for their protection, their privacy, and their dignity. We'll see you again on Freedom Alive.
Matt, two words that I took away from that: demoralizing and futility.
Yeah, it's demoralizing when you come in second, third, or whatever, and you know you should have come in first. And then it's futile to continue to do that because you know that the same thing's going to happen again. You're on a completely different playing field. It has no equality, no competition that really is fair and equitable, you know. So I think more and more women like her obviously are going to continue to speak up. Mm-hmm. This is insanity. The common person, I think the percentages are very high in terms of the majority of people, the vast majority of people in America believe in common sense. Girls should compete against girls and boys against boys. It's as simple as that. I'm not sure how much more you have to do, really say it to it.
Every episode, we strive to bring truth into current issues that are really causing a lot of confusion. And if there's ever one where wisdom and strength, conviction, those sort of things need to prevail, it is this one. We will continue to stay against this and bring it to you. In closing, remember Isaiah 41, verse 10, which says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time, where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.